The morning the world ended for the second time, the sun had the audacity to be shining. It was a stupid, cheerful, yellow kind of sun, pouring through the kitchen window and catching on the dust motes dancing over the sink. I was standing there, one hand wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, the other tracing the cool, smooth surface of the countertop. It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays are supposed to be benign, forgettable. You get through a Tuesday to get through a Wednesday. There's no poetry in a Tuesday. And yet, there I was, in the quiet of my own kitchen, my heart about to be ripped out of my chest all over again. My phone was on the counter, face down like it always is. I'm not one of those people who was glued to it first thing. I like to let the world wait a little bit, to sip my coffee and just be. To remember what it felt like when the house was loud. That particular morning, the quiet felt heavier than usual. It was a thick, woolen blanket of silence, the kind that seems to absorb even the sound of your own breathing. I was thinking about Leo. I'm always thinking about Leo. But some mornings the thoughts are sharper, more visceral. This was one of those mornings. I could almost smell his childhood smell, grass and sunshine, and that faint, sweet scent of boyhood that clung to his hair even after a bath. The phone vibrated, a low, insistent buzz against the granite that made me jump, sloshing hot coffee onto my hand. I swore softly, wiping my hand on my robe, and flipped it over. I expected it to be my husband, Mark, reminding me about the plumber coming later, or my sister, checking in like she does every few days, her voice always laced with a careful, gentle pity that I both crave and resent. But it wasn't a call. It was a notification, a text message. And the name on the screen was Leo. My breath left my body in a single, silent whoosh. It didn't feel like my lungs were collapsing. It felt like my entire body was turning inside out. The world didn't go dark, it went blindingly, painfully bright. The cheerful sun was now a spotlight on this impossible, cruel trick. My vision tunneled, narrowing to those 3 letters, L. He'd been gone for 18 months. 18 months of a hollowed-out existence, of a grief so profound it had its own weight, its own geography inside my chest. We'd buried him. I'd held the cold, smooth urn in my hands. I'd scattered his ashes at his favorite spot by the lake, the wind whipping my hair, taking a part of him and a part of me out over the water. He was gone, utterly, irrevocably gone. And yet, his name was flashing on my phone. My first thought wasn't ghost or miracle. It was a mistake, a sick, twisted, technological error. Someone had gotten a new number. Some poor, unsuspecting person named Leo was trying to text his mom or his friend, and his phone had glitched, and the message had landed here, in this house of ghosts. That had to be it. My hands were trembling so violently, I could barely hold the phone. My thumb smeared against the screen as I tried to swipe it open. The password. What was my password? My mind was a blank, white sheet of panic. I fumbled, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and finally the screen unlocked. The message thread opened, and there it was. At the top, the contact photo I could never bring myself to change. It was him, at 16, his smile a little lopsided, his baseball cap on backwards, a smudge of dirt on his cheek, and below that, a new text bubble. Just one line, sent at 7:04 a.m. I didn't want to read it. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to shatter it against the wall, to destroy this impossible thing that was tearing open a wound that had only just begun to scab over. But I couldn't look away. My eyes, against my will, focused on the words. It said, "Hey, Mom, I know this is going to sound crazy." That was it. The bubble ended there. My mind, reeling, tried to finish the sentence. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm not really dead. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I've been in a secret witness protection program. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I'm a ghost with a cell phone plan. Every possibility was more ludicrous than the last, and yet, in that moment, my starving, grieving heart clung to every single one. This wasn't a wrong number. A wrong number would say, "Hey, is this Sarah?" Or, "We still on for tonight?" This this was addressed to me. This was for me. A sound escaped my lips, a strangled, half-gasp, half-sob. I stumbled back from the counter, my legs hitting the kitchen chair, and I collapsed into it. The phone felt like a live wire in my hand, buzzing with an otherworldly energy. I just stared at it, at those words, at his face. The silence in the kitchen was no longer just empty, it was now charged, expectant, waiting. For what? For another message? For the phone to ring? For him to walk through the door and say it was all a bad dream? I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to exhale, a shaky, ragged sound in the stillness. What do you do? Who do you call? Do you call your husband and say, "Hey, honey, I just got a text from our deceased son"? He'd think I'd finally, truly lost my mind. And maybe I had. Maybe this was it. The breaking point. Grief-induced psychosis. I'd read about things like that. The mind unable to cope, just inventing a new reality. But the phone was real. The words were real. The glowing screen was real. I reached out a trembling finger and touched his picture, the cool, smooth glass of the screen. "Leo?" I whispered into the empty room, my voice a hoarse, broken thing. Is that really you?" There was no answer, just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirp of a bird outside, and the frantic, deafening roar of my own pulse in my ears. I was frozen in that chair, clutching the phone, a prisoner to a mystery I couldn't begin to solve. My whole world tilted off its axis once again, all because of a few words on a screen from a boy I had loved and lost and would. The seconds stretched into a small eternity. I sat there, a statue in a bathrobe, the world reduced to the glowing rectangle in my hand. Every nerve ending was on fire, screaming at me to do something, to answer, to demand an explanation. But I was paralyzed, caught between a hope so terrifying it felt like a physical ache and the crushing, logical certainty that this was some kind of cruel, cosmic mistake. My thumb hovered over the screen, shaking, wanting to type back, "Who is this?" But the words felt like a betrayal. To even entertain the idea that it wasn't him felt like I was denying his existence all over again. And then, the phone vibrated again in my hand. A second text, a sharp electric jolt that shot straight up my arm and into my jaw. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped it. My eyes, wide and burning with unshed tears, snapped back to the screen. The new message appeared, completing the first. "Hey, Mom. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need to talk to you. It's important. It's important." Those two words undid me completely. They were so him, so Leo. When he was little, "it's important" could mean anything from a lost action figure to a skinned knee. As a teenager, it was usually about a forgotten permission slip or needing a ride at the last minute. But it was always delivered with that same earnest gravity, a weight that demanded immediate attention. Hearing that phrase now, in this context, from this impossible source, shattered the last of my composure. A sob broke loose from my chest, raw and painful. Tears I didn't even know I was holding back spilled over, blurring the screen, making his name and his message swim in a watery haze. This wasn't a wrong number. The cadence, the phrasing, it was his. It was his. My rational mind, the part that had been screaming, "Impossible," was being drowned out by the desperate primal voice of a mother's heart. This was my boy, Somehow, some way, this was my Leo. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, smearing tears across my cheek. I had to answer. I had to know. My fingers, clumsy and cold, fumbled over the digital keyboard. I typed a single word, the most important word. How? I stared at it, the single stark question in the response bubble. It looked insane. It felt inadequate. How did you ask your dead son to explain the mechanics of his resurrection via text message? But it was. The three little dots appeared immediately. They pulsed, hypnotic, a tiny animated heartbeat on the screen. He was typing. He was typing. My own heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I couldn't breathe. I just watched those dots, my entire being suspended in that liminal space between sending a message and receiving a reply. The world had ceased to exist. There was no kitchen, no sunshine, no memory of a life before this moment. There was only the phone, the dots, and the agonizing wait. Finally, the reply came. It's a long story, and it's complicated. I can't explain it all right now, but I need to see you. Can you meet me? Meet him. The words were a punch to the gut. My mind raced, conjuring images. Witter, at the cemetery, at the lake, in some shadowy in-between place that only the dead could access. The practicalities of it all felt absurd and terrifying. Where? I typed back, my fingers moving faster now, driven by a frantic energy. The usual spot, by the big oak tree, at noon. The air left my lungs in a rush. The usual spot, the big oak tree at the edge of Miller's Park, the one that overlooked the creek. It was our spot. When Leo was small, we'd have picnics there. When he was older and moody, it was where I'd find him when he needed to get out of the house, sitting with his back against the rough bark, sketching in a notebook or just staring at the water. It was the last place we had a real good conversation before the accident. He told me about a girl he liked, his voice shy, his cheeks flushed. We'd talked about college, about the future. It was a place saturated with him, with us. This wasn't a random location a stranger would pick. This was intimate. This was specific. This was a key turning in a lock deep inside me. Okay. I typed the word before I could think, before logic could intervene and tell me I was agreeing to meet a ghost, or worse, a cruel impersonator. I'll be there. The three dots appeared again, lingered for a moment, and then vanished. No great, no see you then, just silence. The conversation was over. I was left sitting in my kitchen chair, the phone now dark and silent in my lap, the weight of what I had just agreed to settling over me like a lead blanket. Noon. I looked at the clock on the stove. 7:22 a.m. I had less than 5 hours until I went to meet my son who had been dead for a year and a half at our special spot in the park. What was I supposed to do until then? Make breakfast? Fold laundry? How was I supposed to just go about my morning? I heard the floorboards creak upstairs. Mark was awake. The sound was like a splash of cold reality. What was I going to tell him? Honey, don't go to work today. I'm meeting our dead son for a lunch date. He'd call a doctor. He'd hold me and cry, and I'd see the fresh grief and worry in his eyes, and it would break me in a whole new way. He'd handled Leo's death so differently from me. He'd retreated into a quiet, stoic shell, burying himself in work, in fixing things around the house, as if by maintaining order in the external world, he could somehow mend the internal chaos. We'd been two ships passing in the night, ever since orbiting the same black hole of loss, but never being able to truly bridge the gap between our separate griefs. I couldn't tell him, not yet. Not until I knew what this was. If this was my mind finally snapping, then I would bear that cross alone. I wouldn't put him through the torment of false hope. And if it was real, if by some miracle it was real, I needed to see it for myself first. I needed to have that moment, whatever it was, without his practical, grieving father's heart complicating it. I stood up, my legs feeling weak and foreign beneath me. I placed the phone carefully, deliberately, back on the counter, screen down, as if it were a sleeping animal that might startle. I walked to the sink and poured the rest of my cold coffee down the drain, watching the brown liquid swirl and disappear. I had to act normal. I had to get through the next few hours. I had to be ready for noon, ready to walk into whatever. The next few hours were the longest of my life, which is saying something because the hours after the police came to our door had felt like an eternity carved from stone. But this was different. That was a slow, crushing descent into a cold, dark ocean. This was like treading water in a storm, the waves of hope and fear crashing over me one after the other, leaving me gasping and disoriented. I moved through the motions of the morning on autopilot, a ghost in my own home. I heard Mark come downstairs, his footsteps heavy and familiar on the creaky third step. I was scrubbing the already clean countertop with a ferocity that was completely unnecessary when he walked in. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. He came up behind me and planted a soft kiss on my shoulder, a habitual gesture that had felt like a lifeline for years, but now just felt like an anchor, tying me to a reality I was about to possibly abandon. I forced myself to relax, to not flinch away. "Morning," I managed, my voice sounding strangely high-pitched to my own ears. I kept scrubbing. "You okay?" he asked, pulling back and opening the cupboard to get a mug. "You're gonna wear a hole in that granite." I stopped, dropping the sponge into the sink. "Just couldn't sleep," I said, which wasn't a lie. It was just a massive, cavernous understatement. I turned and watched him pour his coffee. His shoulders, once so broad and sure, seemed to carry a permanent slump now. There were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 18 months ago. We were both just shells of the people we used to be, two fragments of a broken vessel, rattling around in this too big, too quiet house. How could I tell him? How could I possibly explain the impossible and risk seeing that fragile shell of his crack wide open? "I was thinking," I began, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I might go for a walk later, to the park, just to get some air." It was a flimsy excuse. I hadn't gone for a leisurely walk in over a year. My outings were functional. The grocery store, the post office, the cemetery. Mark turned, his kind, tired eyes searching my face. He saw the tension there. I know he did. He always could read me. But he must have mistaken it for another wave of the grief that constantly laughed at our shores. He gave me a small, sad smile. "That's a good idea, Claire. It's a beautiful day. You should." He took a sip of his coffee. "I've got that conference call at 11, but I should be done by 1. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs. He was trying. He was always trying, in his own quiet way, to find a path back to me, back to us. And here I was, about to secretly meet the ghost of our son. I felt like the worst kind of traitor. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Lunch would be nice." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and picked up the newspaper. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of mundane sounds, the rustle of the paper, the clink of his spoon in his cereal bowl, the distant hum of his computer as he started his workday in the den. I moved from room to room, straightening cushions that didn't need straightening, wiping down surfaces that were already clean, all the while feeling the phone in my robe pocket like a stolen secret, a live grenade waiting to go off. At 11:15, I heard Mark on his conference call, his voice a low, professional murmur through the door. This was my chance. I crept upstairs, my body thrumming with a nervous energy that made my fingers tremble as I dressed. I chose a simple blue sweater. Leo had always said blue was my color, and a pair of jeans. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and haunted. I looked like a woman on the brink. Maybe I was. I didn't bother with makeup. What was the point? I was either going to meet my son, or I was going to have a complete mental breakdown in a public park. Neither scenario called for lipstick. I slipped on my shoes and walked back downstairs, my footsteps silent on the carpet. I paused by the den door, listening to the steady cadence of Mark's voice. "I'll have those figures to you by end of day," he was saying. He was in his world, the world of numbers and logic, a world where dead sons did not send text messages. I felt a fresh wave of that isolating guilt. I was leaving him behind in that safe, sane world, and I was stepping out into the unknown. I scribbled a quick note on the pad by the door. "Back soon, C," and let myself out into the bright, mocking sunshine. The air was fresh and clean, smelling of cut grass and blooming lilacs. It was a perfect spring day, the kind of day that used to fill me with joy. Now it felt like a taunt. Every step I took towards Miller's Park felt like a step away from reality. The familiar streets, the houses of neighbors I'd known for years, all of it seemed distorted, like I was looking at it through a warped piece of glass. My hand was in my pocket, clenched tightly around my phone. Part of me expected another text, telling me it was a joke, a prank, that I should turn back. But the phone remained silent, a heavy, dormant secret. I reached the entrance to the park. The big oak tree was on the far side, down a gentle slope near the creek. I could see its sprawling, majestic branches from where I stood. My feet felt rooted to the pavement. This was it, the point of no return. In a few minutes, I would know. I would either see him, or I wouldn't, and I wasn't sure which possibility terrified me more. Taking a deep, shuddering breath that did nothing to calm the frantic beating of the walk across the park felt like a dream, the kind where you're trying to run but your legs are made of lead. Every blade of grass, every chirping bird, every laugh from a child on the distant playground seemed hyper-real, etched into my senses with a painful clarity. My eyes were locked on the oak tree, its ancient, gnarled branches a dark silhouette against the bright blue sky. As I got closer, I could see the dappled shade it cast on the ground beneath, shifting and dancing in the breeze. It was empty. Of course it was empty. A part of me, the rational, broken part, had known it would be. This was the moment the hallucination would end. The cruel joke would be revealed, and I would be left alone, crumpled at the base of this tree, my sanity finally forfeit. My steps slowed, my hope deflating with every footfall. I was maybe 20 yards away when a figure detached itself from the deep shadow of the massive trunk. He had been sitting with his back against it, just like he used to, and now he was rising to his feet. The world tilted. It was him. It was Leo. But it wasn't. He was taller. That was the first jarring thought that pierced the white noise static in my brain. He'd been a lanky boy of 17, still growing into his limbs. This young man was broader in the shoulders, more filled out. His hair was shorter, neater, not the shaggy mop he'd always insisted on, and his face, his beautiful face, had lost its last traces of boyish roundness. The lines of his jaw were sharper, more defined. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, clothes I'd never seen before. He looked older. He looked like he'd aged the 18 months he'd been gone. I stopped dead, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a cry. This wasn't a ghost. He was solid, real. The sunlight caught the dust motes around him, and there he was. But the impossible reality of his presence was almost more frightening than a specter would have been. A ghost I could understand. This was a violation of every natural law I knew.
He took a hesitant step forward, his hands shoved into his pockets, a gesture so achingly familiar it made my heart clench. His eyes, those same warm hazel eyes I'd gazed into 1,000 times, were wide with a nervous apprehension. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice, it was deeper. It had a new, slight gravelly undertone that hadn't been there before. It was the voice of a man, not the boy I remembered. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stood there trembling, drinking him in, my mind frantically trying to reconcile the memory of my son with the living, breathing person in front of me. The son I had mourned, the son whose ashes I had scattered. The air felt thin, impossible to breathe. "I know," he said softly, his voice cracking on the words.
A lot? The words finally tore from my throat, strangled and disbelieving. Leo, you died. We buried you. The words sounded insane, spoken aloud to the person they were about. The car, the accident. I couldn't finish. The images flooded back. The late-night call, the frantic drive to the hospital, the doctor's grim face, Mark's anguished roar in the sterile hallway. He flinched, pain flashing across his features. He looked down at the grass, shuffling his feet. "I know. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Sorry? A hysterical bubble of laughter mixed with a sob in my chest. Sorry for what? For being dead? Or for not being dead? Which is it, Leo? What is this? My voice was rising, edged with a panic I could no longer control. The emotional dam inside me was breaking, and 18 months of grief came pouring out, not as tears, but as a torrent of confused, furious anguish. "We mourned you. We scattered your ashes. I have spent every single day since then trying to figure out how to breathe without you in the world. And you're just standing here telling me you're sorry?" I was screaming at him now, my fists clenched at my sides. The mother and me wanted to rush forward and crush him in a hug, to feel the solid weight of him, to smell his skin. The betrayed, broken woman wanted to shake him, to demand answers for this unimaginable cruelty. He looked up, and I saw tears streaming down his face now, too. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It was a mistake, a witness protection thing. They said it was the only way. They faked the accident. They said it was for our protection, too. They said if anyone thought I was still alive, they'd come after you and Dad." The words landed like physical blows. Witness protection. Faked accident. They. It was a storyline from a bad movie, something that happened to other people, on television screens, not to a family from a quiet suburb who worried about mortgage payments and whose biggest drama was usually a leaky faucet. I stared at him, my mind reeling, trying to process this new, impossible layer to the nightmare. Who are they?" I finally managed to ask, my voice a ragged whisper. He looked around, a nervous, furtive glance that seemed so out of place on my brave, confident boy. "The U.S. Marshals," he said, his voice low. I saw something, Mom. That night, after the football game, I saw a bad drug deal going down behind the bleachers. I didn't mean to, but one of them saw me. He was a really, really dangerous guy. Connected. They found out who I was. The marshals intercepted me on my way home. They said I was a target. They said the only way to keep me safe, to keep you and Dad safe, was to make it look like I was gone. They staged the car crash. They said it would be temporary, just until the trial. He was talking fast, the words tumbling out as if he'd been rehearsing them. And with every word, my world, the already shattered remains of it, was being ground into finer and finer dust. It was too much. It was too big, too crazy. I felt my legs give way, the strength draining out of me completely. I sank to my knees in the soft grass, the world swimming in a blur of green.
I knelt there in the grass, the dampness seeping through the knees of my jeans, a cold, grounding sensation in a universe that had lost all its anchors. I just stared up at him, at this young man who was my son. My mind trying to catch up, to build a new reality on the ruins of the old one. Witness protection, staged accidents, U.S. Marshals? These were words from a spy novel, not from the life of a boy who loved peanut butter sandwiches and building elaborate Lego sets. "They took you?" I finally whispered, the question sounding small and childlike. "They just took you? And they let us bury an empty casket? They let us think you were dead?" The anger was returning, a hot, sharp blade cutting through the shock. "They let me mourn you? They let your father? They let him break into 1,000 pieces? How could they? How could you let them?" He knelt down in front of me then, his eyes level with mine, and the raw pain in them was so familiar, so purely Leo, that it stole my breath. "I didn't have a choice, Mom," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "They showed me files, pictures of the sky, of the people he'd hurt. They said if I didn't go along with it, he'd come for you, for Dad. They said it was the only way. They drove me to the crash site. I saw the car. It was totaled. They made me touch it, to see how real it looked. They said if I didn't believe it, no one else would. And then they put me in a car and they drove me away. I watched my whole life disappear in the rearview mirror." A sob racked his body. "You have to believe me. I wanted to call you every single day. I thought about you every second." He reached out a hand, tentatively, as if I were a frightened animal. I looked at it. It was his hand. The same long fingers, the same little scar on the knuckle from when he'd fallen off his bike in the 5th grade. This was real. This was happening. The story was insane, a labyrinth of lies and government secrecy, but the boy in front of me was not. The love in his eyes was not. A sound escaped me, a half sob, half gasp, and then I was moving. I lunged forward, my arms wrapping around him, pulling him into me with a force I didn't know I still possessed. I buried my face in his shoulder in the familiar yet foreign scent of him. No longer just grass and boy, but soap and clean cotton and something else, something indefinable, the scent of a life lived apart from me. He felt solid, warm, alive. My son was alive. I held him so tightly, as if my very grip could fuse him back into my world, could undo the 18 months of separation. I was crying openly now, great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I felt his arms come around me, holding me just as tightly, his own tears hot against my neck. We stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the ground under that old oak tree. 2 lost pieces of a puzzle. When my tears finally subsided to shaky hiccups, I pulled back just enough to cradle his face in my hands. I wiped his tears away with my thumbs, stroking his cheeks, needing the physical proof to override a 1.5 years of grief-hardened belief. "You're here," I breathed. The words a prayer, a statement of fact, a miracle. "You're really here." He nodded, a watery smile touching his lips. "I'm here, Mom." 1,000 questions swarmed in my mind, a chaotic buzz. "Where have you been living? What name did they give you? Did you finish school? Are you safe now? Is that why you're here? Is it over?" The questions tumbled out, a frantic need to fill the void of the lost time. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I've been in a small town upstate. A different name, a different school. It was lonely. so lonely. And it's not over, not really. The trial is coming up. That's part of why I'm here." He looked away. His gaze drifted towards the babbling creek. The hesitation in his voice sent a fresh chill down my spine. There was more. This wasn't just a happy reunion. "What is it, Leo?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. The mother's instinct, dormant for so long, was roaring back to life. "Tell me." He looked back at me, his eyes filled with a conflict I couldn't decipher. "I can't stay, Mom. I'm not supposed to be here at all. If they find out I contacted you—" He trailed off, the unspoken consequence hanging heavy in the air between us. "Then why did you?" I pressed, my heart starting its frantic hammering again. "Why take the risk?" He swallowed hard, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Because I need your help, and because there's something else. Something I didn't tell the marshals. Something I only just found out myself." The world, which had just righted itself moments before, tilted on its axis once more. The miracle was becoming more complicated, more dangerous. My son was—
The word help hung in the air between us, so much heavier than it should have been. This wasn't a request for help with homework or a ride to a friend's house. This was a plea from a son who had been living a lie, a plea wrapped in secrecy and fear. The simple, unadulterated joy of holding him again was suddenly clouded by a new, sharp-edged dread. "Found out what?" I asked, my voice low and steady, though my insides were churning. My hands were still on his face, but now the touch felt different, less about reassurance and more about holding on, about preventing him from being swept away again by this unseen current he was caught in. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "The guy I'm supposed to testify against, his name is Kovac, Anton Kovac." The name meant nothing to me, just a sound, but the way Leo said it, with a mixture of fear and loathing, made it feel like a dark stain on the bright day. "The marshals, they have their case. They think it's solid. But when they moved me, when they set me up with my new life, they gave me a handler, a guy named Miller. He was supposed to be my lifeline, check in on me, make sure I was safe, prepping me for the trial." I nodded, trying to follow, to build this shadow world in my mind where my son had been living. "Miller was— Okay, at first," Leo continued, his eyes distant, remembering. "Strict, by the book. But a few months ago he started getting sloppy. He'd be late for our check-ins. He smelled like whiskey once. He started talking, complaining about money, about how the government doesn't pay marshals enough for the risks they take." Leo's gaze snapped back to me, intense and clear. "And then last week I saw him. I wasn't supposed to be in the city, but I had a friend who needed a ride. And I saw Miller. He was getting out of a car, a really expensive car. And the guy driving it was Kovac's lawyer. I saw his picture in the files they showed me at the beginning. I'm sure of it." The pieces, ugly and sharp, began to click into place in my mind. "His handler is corrupt?" The word felt foreign, dramatic. "I think so," Leo said, his voice tight with anxiety. "I think he's been feeding them information. I think he's the reason they found my first safe row 6 months ago, the reason we had to move in the middle of the night. It was never a leak from the department. It was him. And if he's working for them, then everything the marshals think is secure isn't. My new identity, my location, it's all compromised.
And if Kovac finds out I'm the key witness? He didn't need to finish the sentence. The fear in his eyes said it all. A cold fury began to bloom in my chest, a mother bear protectiveness so fierce it eclipsed my own fear. They had taken my son. They had put him in this impossible situation. And now, one of the very people sworn to protect him was potentially selling him out. The grief that had defined me for so long was being rapidly replaced by a white-hot rage. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice surprisingly firm. "We have to tell someone, the other marshals, your real ones." "And say what?" Leo asked, a hint of desperation in his voice. "That I, a minor in witness protection, broke protocol, traveled to another city, and just happened to see my handler with the defense attorney? They'd pull me out, stick me in some deeper hole, and probably discredit me so much my testimony wouldn't matter. Miller would deny it. It would be my word against his. And who were they gonna believe? A decorated marshal or a scared kid?" He was right. The logic of it was sickening, but it was sound. He was trapped. "So you came to me," I said, the full weight of his decisions settling on my shoulders. He had risked everything, his safety, the case, his new, fragile life, to come to the one person he thought could help, the one person he trusted absolutely. "I didn't know where else to go," he whispered, his vulnerability stripping years off his face, making him look like the boy I remembered. "I have evidence, Mom. I've been recording my conversations with Miller on my phone for the last month. Just audio. He doesn't know. He says enough, hints at things, complains about money. I think it's enough to prove what he's doing, but I can't take it to the marshals myself. I need someone they can't ignore. I need you to take it to someone else. The FBI, maybe. A reporter, I don't know. But you have to do it. And you have to be careful. If Miller or Kovac's people find out you have it..." He reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small black thumb drive. It was so innocuous, a tiny sliver of plastic and metal, but it felt like the most dangerous object I had ever seen. He pressed it into my hand, my fingers closed around it. It was warm from his body heat. I was holding my son's life in my hand. The immensity of the moment threatened to overwhelm me. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a mission, a clandestine, dangerous transfer of information that felt like it belonged in a thriller, not in my quiet, grief-stricken life. I looked from the thumb drive in my palm to my son's anxious, hopeful face. The boy who loved baseball and video games was entrusting me with his survival. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I slipped the thumb drive into the pocket of my jeans, a mirror image of his gesture. It felt like a lead weight. "Okay, Leo, I'll do it. I'll figure it out." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. He leaned forward and hugged me again, a quick, tight embrace. "Thank you," he breathed into my ear. "I have to go. I can't be gone too long. Miller checks in." "Wait," I said, panic seizing me as he started to pull away. "How do I contact you? How will I know you're safe?" He stood up, looking down at me with a sad smile. "You can't contact me, Mom. It's too risky. I'll find a way to reach you. After the trial, if this works, maybe then." The maybe hung in the air, a fragile, heartbreaking possibility. He took a step back, then another, his eyes locked on mine, memorizing me, just as I was memorizing him. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice strong and clear now. "Tell Dad. Tell him I love him too. And then I'm sorry for everything." And then he turned and walked away, quickly, without looking back, disappearing through the trees as silently as he had appeared. I stayed on my knees in the grass, the shape of him already gone from my arms, the weight of the thumb drive a burning brand in my pocket. I had my son back, only to lose him again in the space of minutes. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't gone. He was out there, alive, and he needed me. And for the first time in 18 months, I had a reason to be. I don't know how long I knelt there after he was gone. Time had lost all meaning. The sun was still shining, the birds were still singing, but the world had been fundamentally remade. The grass beneath my knees was just grass again, the oak tree just a tree. The magical, impossible bubble of the reunion had popped, leaving behind the stark, cold reality of the secret now burning a hole in my pocket. The thumb drive, evidence, corruption. My son's life depending on me. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through me. I scrambled to my feet, my legs stiff and protesting. I had to get home. I had to think. I had to figure out what to do with this thing. I looked around the park, suddenly paranoid. Was anyone watching? Had someone seen us? The young mother pushing a stroller on the distant path, the old man reading a book on a bench. Were they just who they appeared to be? Or were they eyes for this Kovac man? The peaceful park now felt like a landscape full of hidden threats. I started walking, forcing myself not to run, to keep my pace casual, normal. Every nerve ending was screaming. The short drive home was a blur. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a sinister black sedan following me. There was only a minivan with a barking dog in the back. My hands were clenched so tightly on the steering wheel, my knuckles were white. I pulled into our driveway, my heart sinking when I saw Mark's car was still there. His conference call must have run long. I had hoped for a few minutes alone, to hide the drive, to process this cataclysm in private. I took a deep, steadying breath, trying to smooth the wild panic from my face. I could not tell him. Not like this. Not until I had a plan. Seeing the hope in his eyes and only to have it crushed if I failed, I couldn't do that to him. The burden was mine to carry, for now. I walked inside, the familiar creak of the front door sounding like a gunshot in the tense silence. Mark was in the kitchen, washing his coffee mug at the sink. He turned as I came in, and his smile was warm, genuine. "Hey, you. How was the walk? You have some color in your cheeks." A walk. I had almost forgotten the lie I'd told. I managed a weak smile in return. It was good. The fresh air helped. It wasn't a complete lie. The air had been filled with a miracle and a terror. He dried his hands and came over to me, wrapping his arms around me in a proper hug. I stiffened for a second, the secret a tangible barrier between us, before forcing myself to relax into his embrace, to rest my head on his shoulder. It felt so normal, so achingly, deceptively normal. He had no idea that the woman he was holding had just held their son, that the heart beating against his chest was now a vault containing a dangerous truth. He said, "For lunch." He pulled back, his hands on my shoulders.
My stomach churned. The thought of food was impossible. The thought of sitting in a cheerful restaurant, making small talk, pretending my world hadn't just been ripped open and stitched back together with a thread of sheer terror, it was unthinkable. I actually don't feel very well," I said, and this, at least, was the absolute truth. I felt dizzy, nauseous, my entire system overloaded. I think I might have gotten too much sun. I just need to lie down for a bit. The concern in his eyes was immediate and heartbreaking. "Oh, honey, of course. You go on up. Can I get you anything? Some water? Aspirin?" No, I'm fine," I said, too quickly. I forced another smile. "Just need to close my eyes for a little while. We can have lunch another time." He nodded, his brows still furrowed with worry. I turned and walked upstairs, feeling his gaze on my back. I walked into our bedroom and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, my eyes shut tight. The weight of the thumb drive was immense. I had to hide it, somewhere safe, somewhere no one would ever think to look. I scanned the room. Not in a jewelry box,
not taped to the back of a drawer. Too obvious. Then my gaze fell on the old, heavy family Bible on the shelf in the corner. It had been my grandmother's. We never opened it. It was a relic, a decoration. I walked over, my footsteps silent on the carpet, and lifted it down. It was thick, the leather cover cool and dusty. I opened it. The thin, onion skin pages whispered. I found the center, where the binding created a deep, narrow gutter. I slipped the thumb drive into that hidden crevice and closed the book, the cover thumping softly shut. It was safe. For now. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the thud of my own heart the only sound in the quiet room. My mind was racing, a frantic hamster on a wheel. The FBI? A reporter? How did one even contact the FBI? Did you just walk into a field office and ask to speak to an agent? And what would I say? Hello, my son, who is officially dead, gave me this thumb drive that proves his U.S. Marshal handler is corrupt. They'd think I was insane. They might detain me. They might call Mark. They might even call Miller. A reporter was just as risky. What if they published something before the authorities could act, tipping off Miller and Kovac? I was trapped in a labyrinth with no map. I had the key to saving my son, but I had no idea which door it unlocked. The responsibility was a physical pressure on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had to be smart. I had to be careful. One wrong move.
I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the angle of the light in the room had changed, casting long, late afternoon shadows across the floor. The sleep had been thin and fitful, populated by fragmented dreams of chasing Leo through endless, shifting corridors, the thumb drive growing heavier and heavier in my hand until I could no longer run. I woke with a start, my heart pounding, the reality of the situation crashing back over me with the force of a tidal wave. For a few disorienting seconds, I lay there, listening. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard it. The low, rhythmic hum of the lawnmower from the backyard. Mark. He was cutting the grass. It was his Saturday ritual, a way to impose order on the world, one neat row at a time. The normalcy of the sound was both a comfort and a torment. I pushed myself up, my body feeling leaden. The thumb drive was safe, but it was a dormant bomb, and I was the only one who knew the timer was ticking. I had to act. I had to find a way. Lying here in the safety of my bedroom wasn't an option. Quietly, I went to the door and locked it. The soft click of the bolt sliding into place felt definitive, a separation from the world where I was just Claire, Mark's wife, a grieving mother. On this side of the door, I was a conspirator, a soldier in a secret war for my son's life. I pulled my laptop from the nightstand and brought it to the bed, opening it with a sense of grim purpose. The screen glowed to life. I opened a search engine, my fingers hovering over the keys. What did I even search for? How to report a corrupt U.S. Marshal? FBI tip line? It all felt so amateurish, so dangerously exposed. I was certain they monitored these things. What if my search query itself raised a red flag somewhere in a dark, data-collecting server farm? I decided to be more general. I typed in Anton Kovac. The results loaded and my blood ran cold. There were news articles, but they were vague, carefully worded pieces about an alleged organized crime figure facing potential federal charges. They mentioned his ties to drug trafficking and money laundering, but the details were scant, the language cautious, as if the journalists themselves were afraid. I clicked on an image search. The man who stared back at me was in his 50s, with a thick neck, a shaved head, and cold, dead eyes that seemed to look right through the screen. This was the man who had orchestrated. I quickly closed the tab, a primal fear gripping me. I felt dirty, as if just by looking at his picture, I had drawn his attention. Next, I tried U.S. Marshal corruption.
The results were a mix of old news stories about isolated incidents and official government pages outlining integrity policies. It was useless. I was out of my depth, completely and utterly. A fresh wave of despair washed over me. What was I doing? I was a middle-aged woman who balanced the checkbook and volunteered at the library book sale. I wasn't Jason Bourne. I couldn't single-handedly take down a corrupt system. The weight of it was crushing me. I put my head in my hands, my elbows digging into my knees. I couldn't do this. I needed help. But who? And then a name surfaced in my memory, rising from the depths of my past like a life preserver. David Chen. He had been a year ahead of me in college, a journalism major with a fierce sense of justice and a mischievous glint in his eye. We dated, briefly, intensely, before life pulled us in different directions. He was a star investigative reporter now for one of the big national newspapers. I hadn't spoken to him in over 20 years, but I followed his career vaguely on social media, impressed by the hard-hitting systemic corruption he often exposed. He had the credentials, the reach, and, I believed, the integrity. It was a risk, a huge one. Contacting him would create a trail. It would involve another person. But he was also, perhaps the only person I could think of, who would both believe a story this wild and know how to handle it properly. He wouldn't go to the police. He would go to the sources above them. He would know who to trust. The lawnmower outside sputtered and went silent. Mark was done. I heard his footsteps on the back porch, then the sound of the kitchen door opening and closing. I quickly shut my laptop and shoved it under a pillow just as his footsteps sounded on the stairs. "Claire?" he called, his voice gentle outside the door. "You feeling any better? I was thinking I could make us some soup." The kindness in his voice was a knife in my heart. "I'm still resting, honey," I called back, hoping my voice didn't sound as strained as it felt. "Soup sounds wonderful, thank you." I heard him hesitate for a moment, then his footsteps retreated back down the stairs. I waited until I heard the clatter of pots and pans from the kitchen before I pulled the laptop out again. My hands were shaking. This was it. My first active move in this dangerous game. I opened my email. My personal account felt flimsy, vulnerable, but it was all I had. I typed in David's work email address, which was listed on his newspaper's website. I stared at the blank screen, the cursor blinking mockingly. How did you start an email like this? "Dear David, you probably don't remember me." No, that was wrong. He would remember me. We'd meant too much to each other for too short a time to be forgotten. "David, it's Claire Mitchell. I know it's been a very long time, and this is going to sound incredible, but I need your help. It's a matter of life and death, and it involves a story of deep corruption within the U.S. Marshal Service, and a witness they are supposed to be protecting." I paused, my fingers frozen. Was I giving too much away? But I had to give him enough to hook him, to make him understand this wasn't the ramblings of a lonely, menopausal woman. "The witness is my son, Leo. The world believes he died a year and a half ago. He didn't. I have evidence that proves his handler is working for the criminal he is set to testify against. I can't go to the authorities directly. I'm scared. I'm trusting you because I remember the man you were, and I've seen the journalist you've become. Please, can you help us?" I read it over, my heart hammering. It was out there. It was insane, but it was the truth. Before I could lose my nerve, I hit send. The email whooshed away into the ether, a message in a bottle tossed into a hostile sea. I had just cast my line. Now all I could do was... The next 24 hours were a special kind of torture. Every ping from my phone, every chime from my laptop sent a jolt of electric fear through my system. Was it David? Or was it some automated alert that my email had been flagged? I jumped when the doorbell rang, my heart leaping into my throat, convinced it was men in dark suits coming to question me, or worse, Miller himself, having somehow discovered Leo's transgression. It was just a package for Mark.
I moved through the house like a ghost, my senses on high alert, my mind 1,000 miles away. Mark noticed, of course. How could he not? "You're quiet today," he said over the soup he'd made, which I'd only managed to push around my bowl. Is it a bad day?" He meant a grief day, a day where the weight of Leo's absence was particularly crushing. In a way, he was more right than he could possibly imagine. The absence was now a living, breathing presence, a secret I was holding so close it felt like it was burning a hole through me. "Just tired," I mumbled, avoiding his eyes. "I didn't sleep well." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His touch was warm, solid, real. A part of me screamed to just tell him, to unburden myself, to let this shared impossible reality become something we could face together, as we were supposed to face everything. But the image of Leo's terrified eyes, his plea for secrecy, held me back. I couldn't, not until I knew it was safe. To give Mark this hope, only to have it ripped away if I failed, would be a cruelty beyond measure. So I just turned my hand over and laced my fingers with his, giving him a squeeze I hoped was reassuring, and said nothing. The waiting was agony. I checked my email obsessively, refreshing the page every few minutes, my anxiety mounting with each empty inbox. What if he didn't check this account? What if he thought it was a hoax and deleted it? What if he had changed, become cynical, and didn't want to touch a story this messy? The doubts were a swarm of gnats, buzzing incessantly in my ears. It was late the next afternoon when the reply came. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book, my eyes glued to my phone in my lap. The notification popped up. Sender, David Chen. My breath hitched. I fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it, my thumb smearing against the screen as I opened the message. The subject line was simple. Claire. The body of the email was just as direct. I remember you. Of course I do. Your email is the most extraordinary thing I've ever read. I believe you. Don't ask me why, but I do. This is incredibly serious. We cannot discuss this over email. It's not secure. I'm in Chicago on assignment, but I can be in your city tomorrow. Can you meet me? Somewhere public but quiet. A museum cafe, a library. A sob of relief mixed with terror caught in my throat. He believed me. He was coming. I wasn't alone in this anymore. My hands trembled as I typed a reply, suggesting the Atrium Cafe at the City Botanical Gardens for 10 a.m. the next morning. It was always quiet on a weekday, with plenty of open space. No easy places for someone to eavesdrop unnoticed. He replied almost instantly. See you then. The following morning, I told Mark I was meeting an old friend from my college days for coffee. It was the first true thing I'd said to him in days, and the partial honesty felt like a small balm on my guilty conscience. He seemed pleased, even relieved. That's great, Claire. It'll be good for you to get out, see people. He had no idea that the old friend was a Pulitzer-nominated journalist I was about to enlist in a plot that felt like it could get us all killed. The botanical gardens were serene, a world of lush green and humid, earthy air. The cafe was in a glass-walled atrium, surrounded by ferns and the gentle trickle of a small waterfall. I saw him immediately, sitting at a corner table, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. He looked older, obviously, his black hair now shot through with distinguished silver at the temples, but the intensity in his dark eyes was exactly the same. He stood up as I approached him. Claire, he said, his voice low and serious. He didn't try to hug me, for which I was grateful. This wasn't a social call. David, thank you for coming. We sat. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out. And so I did. The words poured out of me in a hushed, frantic torrent. The text message, the meeting in the park, Leo's story about the witness protection, the faked accident, his handler Miller, the audio recordings on the thumb drive.
I told him about the empty casket, the scattered ashes, the 18 months of hell. I told him about the man Leo had become, the fear in his eyes, the weight of the secret he had entrusted to me. I cried, quietly, and David listened, his expression never wavering from one of focused, grave attention. He didn't interrupt. He just let me spill this impossible, painful truth all over the pristine white tablecloth between us. When I was finished, utterly spent, he was silent for a long moment, processing it all. He let out a long, slow breath. "Okay," he said, his voice calm and steady, a rock in my churning sea of panic. "Okay. First, you were right to come to me. Going directly to the marshals is far too risky. If Miller is dirty, he could have allies. The information could be buried, and you and Leo would be in even more danger." Hearing him confirm my deepest fear was both terrifying and validating. "The thumb drive. You have it with you." I nodded, my hand dipping into my purse.
"Don't take it out," he said sharply, his eyes scanning the room. "Not here. I have a source, a very good, very discreet one, at the Department of Justice. An attorney in the Office of the Inspector General. They investigate internal corruption. This is exactly their purview. They operate separately from the marshals. I trust her. I can get the drive to her. She can authenticate the audio, launch a quiet investigation into Miller, and most importantly, she can get Leo into proper, safe protective custody before the trial." It was more than I had dared to hope for. A path, a real, tangible path to safety for my son. "But," David said, his gaze locking with mine, "there's a condition. For this to work, for my source to move on it, she'll need to talk to you. She'll need to hear the story directly from you, to verify the chain of custody for the evidence. It's a risk. You'll have to go on the record." I didn't even have to think about it. "I'll do anything," I whispered, my voice fierce with a mother's resolve. "Anything to keep him safe." David gave me a small, brim smile. "I thought you'd say that." He slid a plain, unmarked white card across the table. On it, written in pen, was a time, an address downtown, and a name. Eleanor Vance. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. It's a law office building. She'll be expecting you. Bring the drive." I picked up the card, my fingers trembling. It felt like holding a ticket to my son's future. It was the first concrete step. I looked up at David, tears of gratitude welling in my eyes. "Thank you, David. I don't know how to ever thank you. Just get your son back, Claire," he said softly, his own eyes holding a glimmer of the young man I'd once known. "That's all the thanks I need. Now, you leave first. I'll wait here a while. And remember, be careful." I stood up, the card clutched tightly in my hand, the weight of the thumb drive in my purse feeling different now, not like a bomb, but like a key. I had a meeting with the Department of Justice. I was going to bring down a corrupt marshal. I was going to save my son. The drive home from the botanical gardens was a blur of focused intensity. The world outside the car window seemed sharper, more defined, as if I were seeing it through a new lens. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now joined by a steely sense of purpose. I had a direction. I had an ally. I had a name. Eleanor Vance. I repeated it in my head like a mantra, a spell against the chaos. When I walked through the front door, the house felt different. It was no longer just a museum of my grief. It was now my command center, the place where I was planning my son's rescue. Mark was at work. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was strategic. I went straight to the bedroom, locked the door again, and took out the thumb drive. I looked at it, this tiny piece of plastic that held so much power. Tomorrow, I would hand it over. Tomorrow, everything would change. But a new, nagging thought began to worm its way into my mind. What was on it? Leo had said it was audio of his conversations with Miller, but was it enough? What if it was just ambiguous muttering?
hints and suggestions that a corrupt marshal could easily explain away. What if it wasn't the smoking gun I needed it to be? I felt a sudden, overwhelming need to know. I had to hear it. I had to hear my son's voice again. Yes, that was part of it. A desperate, hungry part of me needed that connection. But I also had to know what weapon I was about to wield. It was a risk. David had told me not to. What if I somehow corrupted the file? But I couldn't go into that meeting blind. I had to know. With trembling hands, I plugged the thumb drive into my laptop. It appeared as a removable disk, anonymous and blank. I double-clicked. There was a single folder inside, labeled simply M. I opened it. There were a dozen audio files named with dates from the last month. I clicked on the most recent one. The speakers crackled to life, and there he was. Leo's voice, the new, deeper version of it, filled my quiet bedroom. And I just don't get the point of rereading The Great Gatsby for the third time. It's not like the ending is going to change. An older, weary male voice replied, "Miller, just keep your head down and do the work, kid. Blending in is the whole point. You think I wanted to spend my Tuesday reviewing your English essay?" The conversation was mundane, boring even. My heart sank. This was it? This was what was going to save him? I fast-forwarded, my anxiety growing. Snippets of conversations about groceries, about the weather, about a movie Leo had seen. It was all so normal. Then I landed on a section from a file dated 2 weeks ago. "Tough month," Miller was saying, his voice slurred just slightly. "The wife's on my case about the vacation fund, like I'm made of money. This job, they don't pay you for the wrist, not really. Must be hard." Leo's voice was careful, neutral. "Damn right it's hard," Miller grumbled. "You see things, you know things, and the brass just sits in their comfortable offices. Meanwhile, guys on the other side, they understand the value of information. They appreciate it." My breath caught. This was it. This.
"The Kovac case is heating up," Miller said, his voice clear and sharp now, all business. "You're the star witness, kid. Don't forget that. Everything hinges on you. Makes a man think about his options, you know? Where his loyalties really lie." There was a pause, and then Leo, his voice hesitant, asked, "What do you mean, your options?" "I mean, a man has to look out for himself, Leo, and his family. You, of all people, should understand that. You'd do anything to protect your parents, wouldn't you?" The threat was veiled, but it was there. It was all there. The financial pressure, the resentment, the vague allusions to the other side, the direct mention of the case, and the hint of shifting loyalty. It was a pattern. It was enough. I stopped the recording, my heart pounding with a grim satisfaction. It was enough. Eleanor Vance would hear it. She would understand. I safely ejected the thumb drive and held it in my closed fist. I had heard my son's voice. I had heard the danger he was in spoken in the casual, insidious words of the man meant to protect him. The fear was now married to a cold, clear rage. I was ready. The rest of the day and the following morning were an exercise in agonizing patience. I performed the rituals of normal life like an actor in a play. I made breakfast for Mark. I talked about the weather. I nodded and smiled, all the while feeling the card with Eleanor Vance's information burning a hole in my pocket. When it was finally time to leave for the meeting, I told Mark I had a doctor's appointment, a checkup. He bought it, of course. Why wouldn't he? The law office building was a sleek tower of glass and steel in the heart of the city. It felt imposing, anonymous. I took the elevator to the 24th floor, my stomach a tight ball of nerves. The reception area for Vance and Associates was quiet and tastefully furnished. A stern-looking assistant led me to a small, windowless conference room. "Ms. Vance will be with you shortly." I sat down, my purse on my lap,
my hand inside, clenched around the thumb drive. I felt like I was about to make a deal with a very powerful, very dangerous angel. After a few minutes that felt like hours, the door opened and a woman walked in. She was in her late 40s, with a sharp, intelligent face, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a simple, expensive-looking black suit. This was not a woman who suffered fools. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. She didn't offer her hand. "I'm Eleanor Vance. David Chen speaks highly of you. The story you have is remarkable. Let's begin." She sat down opposite me, placing a small, high-quality digital recorder on the table. "For the record," she said, and pressed a button. A red light glowed. "Please state your full name and then, in your own words, tell me everything." And so, for the second time in 2 days, I told the story. It was harder this time. The room was colder, the audience more clinical. I laid bare the most painful moments of my life for this stranger, my voice shaking at times, steadying with anger at others. I told her about the text, the meeting, Leo's story, my encounter with David. When I was finished, I placed the thumb drive on the table and slid it toward her. She looked at it, then back at me, her expression unreadable. "What you're describing is a catastrophic failure of the witness security program. If this is true, Marshall Miller has committed grave crimes and your son is in imminent danger." "If?" I said, a flare of panic rising in me. "The recordings." "The recordings will be analyzed," she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If they are authentic and contain what you say they do, we will move quickly. Our first priority will be to extract your son and secure him. My office will open a formal investigation into Miller. This will all happen quietly. You will tell no one, not your husband, not your best friend, no one. Is that clear?" I nodded, my throat tight. "And Leo? When will you get him?" "As soon as we have verified the evidence. It should only take a few hours. We have procedures for this." She picked up the thumb drive. "You have done the right thing, Mrs. Mitchell, and you have been very brave. Go home. Wait. We will be in touch." And with that, she stood, ended the recording, and left the room, taking the thumb drive and my son's fate with her. I was left alone in the silent, windowless room, the encounter feeling both momentous and strangely anticlimactic. It was out of my hands now. I had passed the baton. All I could do was go home and wait for the phone to ring, praying.
The wait after meeting Eleanor Vance was the most profound silence I have ever known. It was different from the grief-filled quiet of the past 18 months. That silence had been heavy, a thick blanket of absence. This silence was thin, razor-edged, humming with a terrifying potential. Every creak of the house, every tick of the clock was a drumbeat counting down to an unknown future. I had handed over the evidence. I had placed my son's life in the hands of a stranger in a black suit. Now there was nothing to do but exist in this unbearable limbo. Mark came home from work, and I moved through the evening like an automaton. I helped him make dinner, a simple pasta, and we ate at the kitchen table. The conversation was stilted, filled with gaps I was too preoccupied to fill. He was watching me. I could feel it. I knew my behavior was strange, my answers distant. "Claire," he said finally, putting down his fork, "talk to me, please. What's going on? Is it the doctor? Did you get bad news?" The concern in his voice was my undoing. The lie I was living felt like a physical wall between us, and I was so tired of being on the other side of it alone. I looked at his face, the face I had loved for 25 years, now etched with fresh worry because of me. I couldn't carry it all by myself anymore, not when the outcome, whatever it was, would impact him just as deeply.
I took a deep, shaky breath. "It's not the doctor," I said, my voice low. It's something else. Something I have to tell you, and you're going to think I've lost my mind." His brow furrowed. "Just tell me." And so there at the kitchen table, with the remains of our dinner between us, I began. I started with the text message. I watched the disbelief dawn on his face, then the shock, then a flicker of angry hope as I described seeing Leo in the park. I told him everything. The witness protection story, the faked accident, the corrupt Marshal, Miller. I told him about the thumb drive, about David Chen, about my meeting just hours ago with the woman from the Department of Justice. I held nothing back. He listened, utterly still, his face a pale, unreadable mask. When I finished, the kitchen was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. He just stared at me, his eyes searching mine, and I saw the war raging within him, the desperate fatherly hope battling against the logical, broken man who knew that dead sons do not come back to life. "Claire," he began, his voice hoarse, This is... Do you have any idea how this sounds?" "I know," I whispered, tears finally spilling over. "I know how it sounds. But it's true, Mark."
He stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He paced to the sink and stood with his back to me, his shoulders rigid. A text message? A secret meeting? A corrupt Marshal? It sounds like a movie. It sounds like something your mind would construct because it can't handle the truth. He turned around, and his eyes were blazing with a confused anguish. "We buried him, Claire. We buried our son." "I know we did," I cried, standing up to face him. "But it was a lie. A horrible, necessary lie to protect him. Don't you think I've questioned my own sanity? Don't you think I've been through every possible explanation? But he's real, Mark. He's alive, and he's scared, and he needs us. He needed us for the last year and a half." Mark roared, his composure finally shattering. The pain in his voice was a physical thing, filling the room. Where was this protection then? Where was this justice when we were sitting in this empty house, dying inside? "He thought he was protecting us," I shot back, my own voice rising to meet his. "They told him they would come after us if anyone knew he was alive. He did it for us, Mark. He carried this alone all this time, living with a different name in a different town because he thought it would keep us safe." The truth of that, the sheer, selfless burden our boy had been carrying, finally broke through Mark's anger. The fight went out of him all at once, and he sagged against the counter, his head dropping into his hands. A low guttural sob escaped him, a sound of such raw, unvarnished pain that it felt like the house itself was weeping. I went to him then. I wrapped my arms around his heaving shoulders, holding him as he cried, really cried, for the first time since the day we lost Leo. He hadn't allowed himself then. He'd been too busy being strong for me. Now the dam had broken. We stood there in the kitchen, clinging to each other, two shipwrecked souls who had just been thrown a life raft that was both a miracle and a fresh terror. When his sobs subsided into shaky breaths, he lifted his head, his eyes red-rammed and desperate. Is he really out there, Claire?" "He is," I said, my voice firm with a conviction that came from the very core of my being. "He's out there, and we're going to get him back. The people I talked to, they're going to help him. We just have to wait." He searched my face, and I saw the moment belief truly took root, not as a desperate wish, but as a staggering, world-altering fact. The hope that blossomed in his eyes was so bright it was almost painful to look at. He pulled me into a crushing embrace. "Why didn't you tell me?" he murmured into my hair. "Because I couldn't bear to give you this hope if it was all a mistake. I had to be sure, and I was so scared." He held me tighter. "No more secrets," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No more. We face this together.
Whatever happens, we face it together. For the first time since I saw Leo's name on my phone, I felt a sliver of peace. The burden was no longer mine alone to carry. We were a team again. We stood there in the kitchen, holding on to each other in the quiet.
The phone didn't ring that night. Mark and I sat up in the living room long after the last of the daylight had faded, the television on but silent, a forgotten, flickering ghost in the corner. We didn't talk much. There was too much to say, and no words big enough to contain it. We just sat on the couch, our hands clasped tightly together, a silent pact forged in the fires of this impossible reality. Every time a car drove past, our heads would swivel towards the window. Every creak of the house made us tense. The waiting was a physical presence, a third person in the room with us, breathing our air. Mark finally fell into a fitful sleep around 2 a.m., his head lolling back against the cushions, the exhaustion of emotional whiplash finally overtaken him. I stayed awake, watching the digital numbers on the cable box change with an agonizing slowness. 3:17, 4:02, 4:55. My mind raced through every possible scenario. What if Eleanor Vance listened to the recordings and decided they weren't enough? What if Miller found out about the investigation and disappeared with Leo? What if something went wrong during the extraction? The what-ifs were monstrous, each one more terrifying than the last. As the first gray light of dawn began to bleed into the sky, I must have dozed off because the sound of the phone ringing jolted me so violently I nearly fell off the couch. It wasn't my cell phone. It was the landline, the old corded phone on the side table that we kept mostly for emergencies and telemarketers. Its shrill analog ring was like a shriek in the silent house. Mark was awake instantly, his eyes wide and alert. We looked at each other, a shared, breathless terror passing between us. This was it. I lunged for the receiver, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip it. "Hello?" My voice was a ragged croak. "Mrs. Mitchell." It was a woman's voice, cool and professional. "Eleanor Vance." "Yes," I breathed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mark was on his feet now, standing right in front of me, his gaze locked on mine. "It's done," she said, and those two words sent a wave of such profound relief through me that my knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. The evidence was compelling and authenticated. Marshall Miller was taken into custody by our agents an hour ago. He was completely unaware there was no incident. I let out a choked sob, my free hand flying to my mouth. Mark's eyes filled with frantic questions, and Leo, I managed to ask, the most important question in the world. "He is safe," she said, and I could have sworn I heard the faintest hint of human warmth in her tone. "He's with two of my most trusted inspectors. He's shaken, but he's unharmed." The transition was smooth. Can I talk to him?" The need to hear his voice, to know for myself, was a physical ache. She said, "Not yet," her tone returning to its business-like crispness. "He's being debriefed. There are protocols. But he asked me to tell you. He said to tell you he's okay. And he said, thank you." Thank you. The words from my son passed through this formidable woman undid me completely. Tears streamed down my face, silent and unchecked. Mark, seeing my expression, understood. He pulled me into a "He's safe," I whispered into his shoulder. The words a mantra, a prayer answered. "He's safe, Mark. They have him. He's safe." Eleanor Vance continued, her voice pulling me back to the moment. "This is now an active and ongoing investigation. The pre-trial hearings for the Kovac case will be expedited. Your son will be kept in a secure, undisclosed location until then. You will not have contact with him until it is over. This is for his safety and for yours. Do you understand?" I understood. It wasn't the happy ending I craved. Not yet. I couldn't hold him, couldn't see for myself that he was whole, but he was safe. He was out of the shadow world, out of Miller's treacherous hands. That was everything. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger now. "I understand. Thank you. Thank you for believing me." "Get some rest, Mrs. Mitchell," she said,
and then the line went dead. I hung up the phone slowly, the finality of the click echoing in the quiet room. I turned to Mark, and the look on his face was one I hadn't seen in 18 months. It was pure, unadulterated hope, tinged with the awe of a miracle. "He's really coming home?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "He's really coming home," I confirmed. "Not today, not tomorrow, but after the trial, he's coming home." We stood there in the middle of our living room, in the pale morning light, holding each other. The house was still quiet, but the silence was different now. It was no longer the silence of absence or the tense silence of waiting. It was a peaceful, hopeful quiet, the quiet of a storm that has finally passed. The long, dark night was over. Somewhere out there, our son was safe, and for now.
The weeks that followed were the strangest of our lives. It was as if we were living in a photograph that had been tilted slightly off-center. The world looked the same, our house, our street, our routines, but the axis on which it all spun had been fundamentally realigned. The crushing grief was gone, replaced by a buoyant, almost unbearable anticipation. We were waiting again, but this wait was different. This was the wait before a dawn you know with absolute certainty is coming. We didn't hear from Leo. Eleanor Vance had been clear. No contact. It was a necessary deprivation, a final test of our patience. But this silence was filled with meaning, not emptiness. Every morning, I would wake up, and my first thought wouldn't be a fresh wave of sorrow, but a simple, powerful fact. He is alive today. It changed everything. The coffee tasted richer, the sun felt warmer, the sound of Mark whistling in the shower, a sound that had vanished for so long, was now a melody again. We talked about him constantly, not in the hushed, painful tones of remembrance, but with the excited speculation of parents awaiting a child's return from a long trip. "Do you think he's grown taller?" Mark would ask over breakfast. "I bet he has. Boys his age, they sprout up." His voice was deeper, I'd say, a private smile touching my lips. He sounded like a man. We started preparing, quietly, tentatively. We didn't dare change his room. That felt like tempting fate. But Mark went in one Saturday and did a deep clean, dusting the shelves that held his old baseball trophies, vacuuming the carpet with a meticulous care I hadn't seen in him for years. It was an act of faith. I found myself buying his favorite cereal at the grocery store, a box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and putting it in the pantry. It sat there, a bright, yellow box of hope. The fear wasn't entirely gone, of course. It would sneak up on me in quiet moments. What if Kovac's people tried something else? What if something went wrong at the trial? But now, when the cold dread would clutch at my heart, I had a defense. I would remember the steel in Eleanor Vance's voice. It's done. He is safe. I would picture Leo, not in the shadowy clutches of a corrupt marshal, but in a clean, well-lit room, protected by good people, waiting for his chance to come home. We told no one. The secret, which had been such a heavy burden, was now our most treasured possession. We moved through our social lives like actors in a play, smiling and nodding at neighbors, making small talk with colleagues, all the while holding this glorious, explosive truth inside of us. It was our secret garden, a place only the two of us could go, and it made us closer than we had been in years. The wall of
One evening, about a month after the phone call from Eleanor Vance, we were sitting on the back porch, watching the fireflies blink in the twilight. It was a warm, peaceful night, the air sweet with the scent of honeysuckle. "He's going to be different, isn't he?" Mark said, his voice soft and thoughtful. It wasn't a question of fear, but of acceptance. I nodded, leaning my head against his shoulder. Yes, he's lived a whole other life. He's had to be someone else. That changes a person. I thought of the young man in the park, the new sharpness in his jaw, the wary look in his eyes that would sometimes break to reveal the boy I knew. But he's still our Leo. Underneath it all, he's still the boy who loved building forts and who cried at the end of E.T. Mark chuckled, a warm, rich sound. He's going to have a lot of catching up to do. I've got 2 years of bad dad jokes stored up. We lapsed into a comfortable silence, listening to the crickets. The future, which for so long had been a bleak, unchanging landscape of loss, was now wide open, full of possibilities, both wonderful and daunting. There would be adjustments, difficult conversations, a process of rebuilding not just a life, but a family. But we would face it together. We had been to the absolute bottom, and we had found our way back. The love that had been frozen in grief was now thawing, flowing again, stronger for having been tested in the coldest of fires. We were a family, waiting to be whole again,